My parents abandoned me in a trauma ward because my sister's vacation was strictly non-refundable. I endured my physical therapy completely alone. The hospital volunteers who taught me to walk again took me in. 7 years later, they formally adopted me. My biological parents crashed my company's launch party to demand a massive bailout. The microphone was still cold in my right hand when the event manager, Claire, leaned into my space and whispered that 2 people downstairs were refusing to leave the lobby. She said they were telling security they were my parents. I looked down at my hands. The skin across my right knuckles was still pale and thick with scar tissue from the steering wheel impact 7 years ago. In the main hall of the gallery on Michigan Avenue, 200 people were holding glasses of champagne. Soft jazz was playing over the hidden speakers, and my business partner, Jack Tate, was laughing with a lead investor from a firm in Boston. The banner behind him had our logo printed in bold silver font, Vance Logistics Analytics. "They're making a scene," Claire whispered, her hand resting lightly on my sleeve. "The older man told security he built you from scratch and that you owed him a conversation. Put them in the 3rd floor conference room," I said. My voice didn't shake. It was flat, the way I practiced speaking when I had to deliver bad quarterly news to clients. "Don't offer them drinks. Tell them I have 5 minutes." I walked down the quiet carpeted corridor toward the back elevators. To understand why my stomach felt like it was filled with wet gravel, you have to understand how Warren and Diane Hayes ran their household. Growing up in Oak Park, money wasn't scarce, but it was weaponized. Warren was a senior regional manager at a commercial plumbing supply distributor. He tracked every cent that entered and left that house on green ruled ledger paper he kept in a locked desk drawer. If I needed $20 for a high school lab fee, I had to present the syllabus, state why the school couldn't cover it, and promise 2 hours of yard work on Saturday. Amber didn't present syllabi. Amber was 3 years younger than me, loud, charismatic, and convinced from age 12 that she was destined for a life that didn't involve suburban grocery stores or state college tuition. When she wanted $300 boots for a high school talent show, Diane would lean over Warren's shoulder at the kitchen table and whisper until he unlocked the drawer. By the time I turned 22, I had worked 2 jobs through my undergraduate degree at DePaul. I paid my own rent on a drafty studio near the Western Station, bought my own grocery store brand cereal, and learned to exist in the margins of their lives. If I went home for Thanksgiving, the conversation hovered entirely on Amber's latest venture, a short-lived modeling contract, a pop-up boutique that lost $4,000 in 8 weeks, a lifestyle blog that required continuous equipment upgrades. Then came the Tuesday in November, when I was 25. I was driving home from my job as a junior data consultant. It was 8:30 at night, the asphalt on State Street was slick with freezing rain, and a delivery van ran a red light at 40 miles an hour. It hit my driver's side door, with a sound like a freight train slamming into a sheet of tin. I didn't lose consciousness immediately. I remember the smell of burnt electrical wiring, the blinding pain in my left leg where the floorboard had crushed inward, and the cold air rushing through the shattered window. When the paramedics cut me out of the frame 45 minutes later, my femur was splintered into 4 pieces, my collarbone was broken, and my left lung was partially collapsed. I woke up in the orthopedic IQ at Northwestern Memorial 30 hours later, coming out of a heavy haze of morphine and nerve blockers. A nurse handed me my phone, which had been retrieved from the wreckage with a cracked screen. I called my mother first. Diane picked up on the second ring. Background noise echoed through the receiver, the clink of silverware, the loud tannoy announcements of an airport terminal. "Cole," she said. Her tone wasn't frantic. It was impatient. "We were wondering when you'd call. Your father and I are at O'Hare." "Mom," I rasped. My mouth was dry from the breathing tube they'd removed 2 hours earlier. "I was in an accident. I'm in the hospital. At Northwestern." There was a pause on the line. I heard a zipper close, followed by Diane sighing into the microphone. "Cole, please tell me this isn't dramatic. We are literally at the gate for Milan. Amber's Fashion Week pass starts tomorrow. The flights were $7,000 non-refundable, and we spent 6 months coordinating this itinerary." "My leg is crushed, Mom," I said. "They did surgery last night. They put a rod in my leg." "Well, you're in the hospital," she said, her voice dropping into the familiar flat, sharp tone she used when I disrupted a weekend plan. "You're surrounded by doctors and nurses. That's the best place for you. What could we possibly do sitting in a waiting room? We can't cancel Amber's trip, Cole. You know how important this exposure is for her brand. We'll check in when we land at Malpensa." The line went dead. They didn't check in from Malpensa. They didn't call during my second surgery 4 days later, when the surgeons had to clean out an infection along the surgical line. They sent one text 4 days into the trip: "Hope you are resting. Amber's hotel is lovely." I spent 3 weeks in the acute care unit before being transferred to a step-down inpatient rehabilitation center in Skokie. Because I couldn't work, my junior consultant position was filled within a month. My health insurance covered 80% of the initial surgery, leaving me with $42,000 in personal liability, not counting the ongoing rehabilitation bills accumulating at $800 a day. I lay in that rehabilitation ward for 6 weeks. Nobody visited. The guys in the beds next to me had wives who brought homemade soup, brothers who sat in vinyl chairs playing cards, mothers who argued with the floor nurses about extra pillows. My bedside table had a plastic cup of lukewarm water, a box of tissue, and my discharge paperwork growing thicker every afternoon. That was where I met Raymond and Helen Vance. Raymond was 62 at the time, a thick-set man with white hair, broad shoulders, and arms that looked like they had spent 40 years hauling concrete. He was the head physical therapist on the floor, a man who didn't talk much unless he was telling you to set your heel down correctly. Helen was 59, a retired corporate tax attorney who volunteered twice a week helping low-income patients navigate hospital billing disputes and Medicaid paperwork. On a Thursday afternoon in December, I was sitting on the edge of my bed, trying to pull my left sock on with a plastic reacher tool. The tool slipped, the sock fell, and I sat there staring at the linoleum floor, completely spent. Pity parties are strictly prohibited on this corridor, a voice said from the door. I looked up. Raymond was standing there with a clipboard, leaning against the doorframe. Helen was right behind him holding a paper cup from the coffee shop downstairs. I'm not having a pity party, I said, my voice raw. Good, Raymond said, stepping into the room. Because if you were, I'd have to cancel your 3 o'clock session, and you're 3 days behind on your quad flexes. Helen didn't say anything at first. She walked over, picked up the sock, set it on the nightstand, and handed me the coffee. It's dark roast, she said. The cafeteria stuff tastes like boiled boots. Raymond told me your family hasn't been in. They're busy, I said automatically. Helen looked at the empty visitor log hanging on the wall by the door. She picked up the pen attached to the string, wrote her name and phone number on the first line, and hung it back up. Now it's not empty, she said. I looked at your billing ledger downstairs, Cole. Northwestern billed you under an out-of-network surgical group for your second procedure. It's an administrative error. I'm going to fix it by Tuesday. She didn't ask for permission. She sat down in the vinyl chair, pulled out a yellow legal pad, and started asking me questions about my insurance policy. For the next 2 months, Raymond rebuilt my body, and Helen rebuilt my defense against financial destruction. Raymond was merciless in the gym. He made me do leg presses when my hamstring felt like it was tearing apart. He stood behind me on the parallel bars, holding my belt while I staggered forward 2 inches at a time, sweating through my gray t-shirt. Pain is just data, Cole, he would grunt in my ear. It tells you where the tissue is fixing itself. Don't fight the data. Use it. Helen fought the hospital billing office like a trial lawyer defending a capital case. By late January, she had forced the surgical group to reclassify my second operation as an emergency intervention, cutting my personal debt from $42,000 to less than $4,000. When my discharge date arrived in February, I had nowhere to go. My lease on my third-floor apartment had expired, my belongings were in a storage locker in Humboldt Park, and I still needed 2 months of intense outpatient therapy before I could walk without a heavy wooden cane. Raymond drove his green pickup truck to the rehab loading dock. He and Helen loaded my 2 duffel bags into the back seat. Where are we going? I asked, leaning on my cane in the passenger seat. Evanston, Raymond said, pulling out into traffic. Guest room is on the first floor. No stairs. Helen put a desk in there so you can run your computer. I can't pay you rent right now, Raymond, I said. Raymond didn't turn his head from the road. Did I ask for rent? I stayed in that guest room in Evanston for 9 months. I learned that in the Vance house dinner was at 6:30 every night. You sat at the round oak table in the dining room. You put your phone in the basket by the refrigerator, and you talked about what you did that day. If you were struggling, you said so, and nobody looked at you like you were an expense item on a ledger. By the second year, I was working again, starting small, building predictive data models for local trucking firms from a spare room in their house. By the 4th year, Jack Tate and I had secured our first angel investment round for Vance Logistics Analytics. I named the company after Raymond and Helen. 3 years ago, on a rainy Tuesday in October, Helen set an envelope down next to my plate during dinner. I opened it. It contained legal paperwork prepared by an attorney in Cook County Probate Court. Adult adoption papers. You don't have to sign it, Helen said softly, her hands resting on the edge of the table. You're 30 years old. You don't need parents on paper. But Raymond and I, well, we'd be honored if you let us make it official. I signed the documents that night. 6 weeks later, a judge in a quiet courtroom in downtown Chicago stamped the order. Cole Hayes legally ceased to exist. I became Cole Vance. Now, standing outside the 3rd-floor conference room on Michigan Avenue, I adjusted my suit jacket, took a breath, and opened the door. Warren and Diane were standing near the floor-to-ceiling glass panel looking out over the city lights. Warren had aged terribly. His hair was completely white, thin and wispy over his scalp. His jacket was a cheap navy blazer that sagged at the shoulders, and his collar was open at the throat. Diane looked thin, her face lined with sharp wrinkles around her mouth, her hair dyed an unnatural shade of blonde that didn't match her complexion. When the door clicked shut, Warren turned around immediately. His eyes swept over my tailored charcoal suit, my leather shoes, and the gold watch on my wrist, a gift from Raymond when we closed our Series A funding. Cole, Warren said. His voice was rough, the tone of a man who hadn't slept in 3 days. He took 2 steps toward me, his hands outstretched as if he were going to grab my arm. I stayed where I was, my hand remaining on the brass door handle. State your business, Warren. Diane stepped forward, her eyebrows pulling together in that familiar expression of aggrieved disappointment she used when I failed to be useful. Is that how you greet your father? After everything we went through raising you? You have 4 minutes, I said. Warren swallowed hard. He looked at the glass wall behind me, where the noise of 200 people laughing and drinking was muffled by the thick double-paned glass. We need $75,000, Cole, cash, or a cashier's check by Friday morning. I almost laughed. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an inquiry into how my leg had healed, or how I had managed to build a firm that occupied an entire floor of a building on Michigan Avenue. It was an invoice. Why? I asked. Warren wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. It's your sister. Amber tried to launch a direct-to-consumer cosmetics brand 2 years ago. She took out a line of credit. Things didn't go the way she planned. The supplier in Guangzhou seized her inventory. The marketing agency sued her for non-payment, and the bank called the note. What note? A home equity loan, Diane blurted out, her voice rising into a pitch that strained against the quiet room. She used the Oak Park house as collateral. She said it was a temporary bridge loan. She said she had investors lined up in New York. Warren signed the authorization because she was desperate, Cole. She was going to go to collection. And now? I asked, my voice remaining entirely flat. The bank issued a final notice of foreclosure on Monday, Warren said, his voice cracking. 14 days. They're auctioning the house on the courthouse steps if we don't cure the default on the primary loan interest. $75,000 buys us 6 months to negotiate a restructure. You have the money, Cole. We saw saw the article in the Crane's Chicago Business. We know what your company is worth. They stood there, two desperate people looking at me not as a son they had abandoned in an orthopedic ward, but as a financial utility, a pipe they could tap to fix a leak. My name, I said slowly, is Cole Vance. Diane blinked, her mouth opening slightly. What? My legal name is Cole Vance, I repeated. I was adopted 3 years ago by Raymond and Helen Vance, the people who stayed in my hospital room while you were flying to Milan, the people who taught me how to walk again while you were looking at fashion shows. Warren's face flushed a dark, mottled red. You changed your name? You let strangers adopt you? You're 33 years old. I owe you nothing, I said. Not $75,000. Not 75 cents. Not a single minute of my time. She's your sister, Cole. Diane shouted, taking a step toward me, her finger pointed at my chest. She made a mistake. Families help each other when things go wrong. You didn't help me when my car was crushed on State Street, I said. You told me my legs were less important than $7,000 in non-refundable airline tickets. Leave this building now, or I will have security remove you for trespassing. I turned the handle, opened the heavy door, and stepped out into the hallway. I didn't look back. I walked down the quiet corridor toward the main hall, where Jack was standing near the microphone platform, holding a fresh glass of bourbon for me. Everything okay? Jack asked, handing me the glass as I approached the group of investors. You look like you just came out of a deposition. Just old business, I said, taking a sip. The liquid burned down my throat, grounding me. Nothing that affects tonight. I raised my glass, rejoined the toast, and let the noise of the room wash over me. For 10 minutes, I thought it was over. I thought I had drawn the line, sealed the border, and left the past behind the heavy glass doors of that conference room. Then my phone vibrated in my breast pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text from Helen. Turn on the news. Now, it's about Amber's loan, and whose name is really on it. I dropped my hand to my side, stepped away from Jack and the investors, and walked toward the quiet lounge area near the south windows. I opened my phone's browser, pulled up the local Chicago news site, and hit the live stream button. A local investigative reporter was standing outside a regional branch of First Northern Bank in Evanston. The banner scrolling across the bottom of the screen read, Major Commercial Loan Fraud Investigation, naming local beauty startup. We are tracking new developments tonight in the sudden collapse of Luminance Beauty, the suburban startup founded by local influencer Amber Hayes, the reporter was saying. Court filings unsealed this afternoon in Cook County Circuit Court reveal that First Northern Bank has filed criminal fraud referrals with the state attorney's office. Investigators allege that more than $350,000 was drawn down against a commercial line of credit using falsified tax returns, forged co-signer signatures, and stolen personal identification. My thumb froze over the screen. The reporter continued. According to bank documents included in the filing, the primary personal guarantor listed on the fraudulent loan application was not Warren Hayes, but his son, Cole Hayes, listed under an active social security number that was used to secure the funds 3 years ago. I felt the room drop away around me. $350,000. 3 years ago. 3 years ago, I was living in Evanston, working 14 hours a day to build my data architecture, using my new legal name, Cole Vance. But my old social security number, the one attached to my medical records, my old credit history, and my former identity had remained in the system. Warren and Diane hadn't come to my launch party to ask for a $75,000 bailout for their house. They had come because the state attorney general's office had opened a criminal file 48 hours ago, and they realized that if the bank proceeded with the fraud recovery, the paper trail wouldn't just lead to Amber. It would lead directly to my former legal identity. My phone vibrated again. This time it was an incoming call from Helen. I picked it up on the first ring. Helen, are you somewhere quiet? Her voice was tight, measured, the voice she used when she was reading an adverse court ruling. I'm in the lounge at the gallery, I said, leaning against the cold glass of the window. I saw the broadcast. It's worse than the report says, Cole, Helen said. I just spoke with a contact in the state attorney's financial crimes division. Amber didn't just forge your signature on the guarantor line. She pulled your old tax filings from 5 years ago, the ones from right before your accident, and presented them to First Northern Bank as proof of ongoing income. Warren signed as a witness. Why my name? I asked, my grip tightening on the phone until my fingers turned white. Why didn't she use her own? Because her credit score was under 400 from her previous failed business, Helen said flatly. And because Warren told her that since you weren't using your old name anymore, it wouldn't affect your current business. They thought if the startup worked, they'd pay off the line before anyone audited the signatures. If it failed, they assumed you'd pay it to keep your reputation clean. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it settled into my chest like lead. They hadn't forgotten me. They had archived me. They had kept my old identity in a drawer like an unused credit card, waiting for a moment when Amber needed liquidity. What happens now? I asked. If First Northern Bank files the formal indictment, it becomes public record within 48 hours, Helen said. The moment your investors at Vance Logistics run a routine compliance sweep on your background, which they will do before the Series B capital wire transfers next month, they'll hit a flagged red flag alert on Cole Hayes for a pending banking fraud felony. I didn't sign those documents, Helen. I know you didn't, she said softly. But to clear your name officially, you have to do 2 things. First, you have to file a sworn affidavit of identity theft with the Evanston Police Department. Second, you have to name Amber and Warren Hayes as the perpetrators under penalty of perjury. And if I do that, Amber goes to prison. Cole, commercial loan fraud over $100,000 carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 4 to 6 years in Illinois. And Warren will likely be charged as an accessory for witnessing the forged documents. I looked back across the gallery floor. Jack was gesturing toward me, motioning for me to come back over to meet a representative from a Chicago private equity fund. The room was lit with soft gold light, rich with the smell of expensive food and success I had spent 7 7 years building with broken bones and 80-hour work weeks. Come home tonight, Cole, Helen said quietly. Raymond and I are sitting in the kitchen. We'll figure this out together. I hung up the phone, walked back into the crowd, and smiled through another 40 minutes of toasts, handshakes, and business card exchanges. My hands didn't shake. My voice remained completely steady. But inside, the cold clarity was sharpening into something heavy. I got into my car at 11 o'clock and drove north on Lake Shore Drive toward Evanston. The dark water of Lake Michigan stretched out to the right, black and flat under the overcast sky. When I pulled up to Raymond and Helen's house, the light in the kitchen was on. I walked through the back door. Raymond was sitting at the oak table with a mug of black tea, his spectacles resting on the bridge of his nose as he looked over a stack of printed legal documents. Helen had her laptop open next to him, 2 highlighters, one yellow, one pink, lying beside a yellow notepad filled with her tight, immaculate handwriting. I sat down in the wooden chair between them. They're coming here tomorrow, Raymond said without preamble. He set his glasses down on the table. Who? I asked. Warren, Raymond said. He called my cell phone 20 minutes ago. He didn't know I had his number saved from when you were in rehab. He was crying, Cole, real tears this time. He said Amber is locked in her bedroom in Oak Park, refusing to come out, and that 2 investigators from the bank tried to serve a subpoena at their house at 7 o'clock. Did you talk to him? I told him if he set foot on my property, I'd throw him off the porch myself, Raymond said, his jaw tightening under his white beard. Then Helen took the phone. Helen looked up from her screen. Her eyes were calm, but there was a sharp edge in her gaze that I recognized from the days she spent battling the hospital billing directors. I told him that any communication regarding Cole Vance or Cole Hayes would go through my legal office. He begged me to listen. He said he would sell his house immediately and give you every dollar of the equity if you just sign an affidavit stating that you authorized Amber to use the line of credit as a family trust instrument. A family trust instrument, I repeated, the words tasting like copper in my mouth. He wants me to lie under oath to protect her. If you sign that paper, Cole, Helen said, laying her hand over mine, you admit to being part of the credit arrangement. You become legally liable for the $350,000. And if First Northern decides to pursue civil recovery for the default, they can attach your equity in Vance Logistics. And if I don't, then tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, we walk into the Cook County State's Attorney's office on West Adams Street, Helen said. We hand them your adoption records, your legal name change documents, your employment records from 3 years ago showing you were living in Evanston under a different name, and a handwriting analysis of the guarantor's signature. We file the identity theft report. By noon, an arrest warrant is issued for Amber Hayes. The room was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. My phone rang in my pocket. The caller ID showed an unlisted Oak Park number. I stared at the screen as it vibrated against the oak table. Once, twice, 3 times. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. 10 seconds later, the notification icon popped up. A 18-second message. I hit speakerphone and set the device in the middle of the table. Diane's voice filled the kitchen. She wasn't yelling anymore. Her voice was cracked, shrill, and trembling with a panicked, ragged edge. Cole, please, please, pick up. The police were just at the door. They left a card. Amber took a bottle of sleeping pills, Cole. We're in the ambulance right now going to McNeil Hospital. She's breathing, but she won't wake up. Please, Cole, she's your sister. You're the only one who can fix this before they arrest her at the hospital. Please call your father. The message cut off with the sound of a siren wailing in the background. Raymond looked at me, his face unreadable. Helen slowly closed her laptop screen halfway, her hand remaining on the plastic frame. McNeil Hospital, I said aloud. I remembered the smell of the disinfectant at Northwestern. I remembered sitting in that bed in December, staring at the empty visitor log hanging on the wall, waiting for a phone call that never came while my mother was packing suitcases for Italy. I stood up from the table, grabbed my coat from the back of the chair, and picked up my car keys. Where are you going, Cole? Helen asked, standing up with me. To McNeil, I said. Cole, Raymond said, his voice dropping into that low, firm tone he used when I was learning to take my first steps, without the parallel bars. You don't owe them your life. You don't owe them your name. I know, I said, looking at the 2 people who had given me a home when I was nothing more than a line item on a hospital discharge sheet. I'm not going there to save them. I'm going there to make sure Warren Hayes looks me in the eye when I hand him the police report. I walked out to my car, pulled out of the driveway, and drove south into the dark. The rain was starting again, cold and thin, streaking across the windshield as I hit the expressway. 40 minutes later, I pulled into the visitor parking lot at McNeil Hospital in Berwyn. The red neon sign of the emergency department glowed through the fog, reflecting off the wet pavement in long, bleeding streaks. I walked through the automatic sliding doors. The waiting room smelled the same as every hospital room I had ever been in. Floor wax, stale coffee, industrial soap, and fear. I saw them immediately. Warren was sitting in a low vinyl chair in the corner under a fluorescent light panel that flickered with a faint buzzing sound. His head was in his hands, his knuckles pressed hard against his forehead. Diane was pacing back and forth in front of the triage desk, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, arguing in a low, furious whisper with a nurse behind the glass partition. When the glass door slid open behind me, Diane turned around, her eyes locked on mine. For a fraction of a second, something like relief flashed across her face, a sudden, desperate hope that the utility had arrived, that the checkbook was open, that the old family dynamic had asserted itself one last time. She hurried across the linoleum floor toward me, her shoes clicking loudly in the quiet room. Cole, she breathed, reaching out with both hands. Thank God you came. The doctors are with her now. They pumped her stomach. She's going to be okay. But the police, 2 officers are sitting outside her door in the ICU right now, Cole. They won't even let us in the room. Warren stood up slowly from the chair, his hands hanging limp at his sides. He looked at me with hollow, sunken eyes. Cole, we can tell the police it was a misunderstanding. We can tell them them you gave her permission years ago and forgot. You just have to sign the form, Cole. That's all it takes. Just sign the form. I looked at Diane. I looked at Warren. I reached inside my breast pocket, pulled out my wallet, and extracted a small white card. It was the business card Helen had handed me before I left Evanston, the direct line contact for Detective Durbin in the Financial Crimes Division of the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. I held it out toward Warren. He didn't take it at first. He just stared at the card in my hand. "What's this?" he whispered. "That's the officer handling the fraud investigation," I said. My voice was steady, quiet, entirely devoid of anger. "I'm meeting him at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning at the courthouse. I'm delivering the handwriting analysis and my adoption papers." Diane gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Cole, no. She's your sister. She almost died tonight. She took those pills because she got caught," I said. "Not because she was sorry. And you let her use my name while I was learning how to walk again in a guest room 20 miles from here. We raised you." Warren roared, his voice suddenly exploding through the quiet ER lobby, drawing the eyes of 2 security guards standing near the entrance. "We fed you. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. You owe us." I took 1 step closer to Warren, stopping less than an inch from his face. I could smell the stale coffee and cold sweat on his clothes. "You left me in an orthopedic ward with a broken leg and $42,000 in debt so your daughter could go to Italy," I whispered. "You didn't raise a son, Warren. You raised an asset you thought you could liquidate when you ran out of money." I dropped the business card onto the small vinyl chair behind him. "Cole, please," Diane sobbed, reaching for my arm as I turned around. "Please, don't do this to us. What are we supposed to do?" I stopped at the glass doors, looking back over my shoulder one last time. "Call your lawyer," I said, "and make sure you pay him up front. Non-refundable." I stepped through the sliding doors out into the rain. The cold air hit my face, clean and sharp, carrying the faint smell of wet lake asphalt from the east. I got into my car, turned the key, and watched the emergency room lights recede in my rearview mirror as I pulled out onto the avenue. My phone chimed on the dashboard console. A text from Jack. "Press release for the Series B announcement is drafted. Need your final review before we submit to the wire at 8 a.m. I looked at the clock on the dash. It was 1:15 a.m. I typed back a single line. "Send it over. I'm ready." I drove back north toward Evanston, toward the quiet house on the tree-lined street where the light in the kitchen was still burning, waiting for me to come home. The rain had stopped by the time I pulled into the driveway, leaving the streets slick and black under the streetlights. When I unlocked the front door and stepped into the hallway, the smell of fresh coffee hit me. Helen was still sitting exactly where I had left her at the kitchen table, though her laptop was closed now. Raymond was in the armchair in the adjacent living room, his head tipped back, snoring softly with a thick legal textbook resting open on his chest. Helen looked up as I took off my coat. She didn't ask how it went. She just poured a second mug of coffee from the French press and pushed it across the oak wood. "They're at McNeil," I said, sitting down. The exhaustion was finally starting to seep into my bones, dulling the adrenaline that had kept me upright in the emergency room. Amber pumped full of charcoal, Warren and Diane looking for a loophole. I gave them Detective Durbin's card. "Did they take it?" Helen asked, her voice calm and level in the quiet house. Warren didn't have a choice. I dropped it on his chair. I took a long sip of the coffee. It was black and scalding. "Jack just sent the draft of the press release. He wants it on the wire by 8. I opened my phone and pulled up the PDF attachment Jack had emailed over. It was a masterpiece of corporate damage control, clinical, precise, and entirely devoid of the messy human reality it represented. Cole Vance, CEO and co-founder of Vance Logistics Analytics, is cooperating fully with the Cook County State's Attorney's Office as the victim of a familial identity theft matter dating back 3 years. This matter does not intersect with the operations, finances, or structural integrity of Vance Logistics. It's good," Helen said, reading over my shoulder. "It builds a firewall between your old name and your current equity. But we need to get ahead of the private equity guys. Boston will wake up in 2 hours, and they run automated sweeps on all their founders' legal profiles every morning. As soon as the court unseals that fraud referral, your name will flag." She was right. Our Series B funding round was scheduled to close on Friday. $12 million from a Boston-based firm led by a managing partner named Conrad Voss. Conrad was a ruthless, numbers-driven guy who didn't tolerate variables. To him, an ongoing criminal investigation surrounding his lead founder wasn't a family tragedy. It was a risk metric. I looked at the clock on the stove. 2:30 in the morning. I had 6.5 hours until my meeting with Durbin. "I'll call Conrad at 7, I said, rubbing my eyes. "Better he hears it from me than a compliance algorithm." I didn't sleep. I took a shower in the guest bathroom, letting the hot water beat down on the tight muscles in my back, and then put on a clean white shirt and my charcoal suit trousers. By 6:45, I was sitting at the desk in my old recovery room, my laptop open, waiting for the sun to come up over Lake Michigan. At exactly 7 o'clock, I dialed Conrad Voss's direct line. He picked up on the third ring. "Cole, it's 6 in the morning in Chicago. You either have a brilliant idea for the quarterly projections, or something's on fire." "Something's on fire, Conrad, but it's contained," I said. I didn't soften my voice. I gave him the exact same tone I used when we lost a client. "In an hour, my PR team is issuing a preemptive release to the wire. My biological sister and father are being indicted today for commercial loan fraud. They used my previous legal name and an old social security number to secure the line of credit 3 years ago without my knowledge." There was silence on the line. I could hear the faint sound of a keyboard clicking as Conrad instantly pulled up his terminal. "Fraud," Conrad said, the word dropping into the conversation like a stone in a well. "350,000? Yes. Who's the bank?" First Northern. More clicking. "Fraud is sticky, Cole," Conrad said. His tone had shifted. The friendly investor was gone. The risk assessor had taken the wheel. "Even when you're the victim, the state investigates you to make sure you weren't complicit. They freeze accounts accounts. They subpoena hard drives. My limited partners don't wire $12 million to a CEO who might have his personal assets frozen on a Tuesday afternoon. My assets are fully insulated, I said, keeping my breathing even. I legally changed my name and severed financial ties 3 years ago. I am sitting down with Detective Durbin at the state's attorney's office at 9 o'clock this morning to hand over the handwriting analysis and file the formal identity theft affidavit. I will have a stamped police report proving my status as the victim by noon. A police report is a piece of paper, Cole. It doesn't stop a civil liability suit if First Northern decides to come after your equity to cover the default. Conrad sighed, a heavy metallic sound through the phone speaker. I'm pausing the wire transfer. My stomach turned over, but I didn't flinch. Conrad, I'm not pulling the term sheet yet, he interrupted, but I'm holding the funds. I need more than a police report. I need a formal letter of clearance from the Cook County prosecutor stating definitively that you are not a target of this investigation. Until I have that on my desk, the $12 million stays in Boston. Get it sorted, Cole. Fast. He hung up. I stared at the black screen of my laptop. Everything I had built over the last 7 years. Every agonizing hour of physical therapy, every late-night writing code, every sacrifice Helen and Raymond had made for me, was suddenly hanging by a thread pulled by Warren and Diane Hayes. When I walked out to the kitchen, Helen had her coat on and a thick manila folder tucked under her arm. Raymond was warming up the truck. Conrad paused the wire, I said. Helen didn't look surprised. She just nodded, her face hardening into the expression of a trial lawyer walking into a hostile courtroom. Then we don't just give Durbin the paperwork. We demand a clearance letter today. Let's go. The drive to the Cook County Courthouse at 26th and California took 45 minutes in the morning gridlock. The sky was the color of wet concrete, and the air smelled of exhaust and damp asphalt. We walked through the metal detectors, rode the elevator to the 4th floor, and navigated a maze of scuffed linoleum hallways to the Financial Crimes Division. Detective Durbin was a heavy-set man in his late 40s with tired eyes and a cheap brown suit. His desk was buried under stacks of file folders and empty coffee cups. When we sat down across from him, he didn't offer any pleasantries. He just opened a fresh legal pad. Mr. Vance, Durbin said, glancing at the adoption paperwork Helen had already slid across the desk. Or Mr. Hayes, whatever we're going with today. I got a call from a hospital in Berwyn last night saying there was an incident with your sister. She attempted suicide, I said flatly. She survived. Convenient timing, Durbin muttered, clicking his pen. He pulled a thick folder from the center of his desk and flipped it open. First Northern Bank handed over the loan origination file yesterday. The signature on the guarantor line is a solid forgery. I'll give you that. But they didn't just forge your name, Cole. He turned a document around and pushed it toward me. It was a supplementary loan application form, filled out in Diane's looping handwriting. They used your medical debt to secure a hardship interest rate, Durbin said. I stared at the paper. My vision tunneled. There, on the second page, was a detailed list of my surgeries. The crushed femur, the collapsed lung, the $42,000 in out-of-network surgical debt. They had used the exact medical catastrophe they abandoned me in to prove to the bank that the family had faced extreme financial hardship, qualifying Amber's fraudulent loan for a subsidized interest rate program designed for struggling households. They submitted your discharge papers from Skokie Rehabilitation, Durbin continued, tapping the page with his pen. Your father signed an affidavit stating that he was your primary caretaker during your recovery, which drained his savings, thereby necessitating the equity draw. A cold, absolute silence settled over me. I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I could hear Helen taking a slow, sharp breath beside me. They didn't just abandon me. They monetized my trauma. While Raymond was carrying me to the bathroom because I couldn't stand on my left leg, Warren was at a bank branch in Evanston, leveraging my shattered bones for a lower percentage point on a cosmetics business. I have the sworn affidavit of identity theft right here, Detective, Helen said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. She slid the manila envelope across the desk. It includes employment records proving Cole was living in Evanston under my roof during the entirety of the timeline Warren claimed to be his caretaker. We want criminal charges filed today, and we need a letter of clearance for my client's corporate board by noon. Durbin looked at the envelope. He didn't touch it immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, rubbing his jaw. I can file the charges, Durbin said slowly. But getting you a clearance letter today is going to be complicated. Why? I asked, my voice finally cutting through the numbness. Just as I spoke, the phone on Durbin's desk rang. He looked at the caller ID, sighed, and picked it up. He listened for 30 seconds, saying nothing, before hanging up and looking back at me. Because of that, Durbin said, pointing at the phone. That was the primary investigator at First Northern. Your father was waiting in the lobby when the branch opened at 8:30 this morning. Doing what? Helen demanded. Filing a counter affidavit, Durbin said, leaning forward and folding his hands on the desk. Warren Hayes is officially claiming that he did not forge your signature. He is claiming that 3 years ago, while you were on heavy narcotic painkillers during your extended physical therapy, he brought the loan documents to your apartment, and you signed them willingly. He says you just don't remember it because of the medication, and now you're lying to protect your new company. Beside me, Helen didn't gasp. She didn't look outraged. She actually laughed. It was a short, dry sound, completely devoid of humor, the kind of laugh a veteran attorney lets out when opposing counsel steps directly into an open elevator shaft. Detective Durbin, Helen said, her voice dropping into a smooth, lethal cadence. Does Warren's counter affidavit happen to specify the exact date he claims he visited Cole, and the address of the apartment? Durbin frowned, flipping to the second page of the file. He traced a finger down the typed lines. He states the documents were signed on the evening of August 14th, at the studio apartment on Western Avenue. He even listed the unit number, 3B. Helen reached into her thick manila folder. She didn't rush. She pulled out a single sheet of paper with a notarized stamp at the the bottom and slid it across the metal desk. That is a lease termination agreement, Helen said. Cole's lease on the Western Avenue studio was legally dissolved in January, 7 months before this loan was originated. He never set foot in that building again. The landlord surrendered his remaining belongings to a storage unit, which I arranged. On August 14th, Unit 3B was occupied by a nursing student named Sarah Kellner. We have her contact information if you'd like to ask her if Warren Hayes stopped by her living room with commercial loan documents. Durbin stared at the lease agreement. He didn't say a word. Helen wasn't finished. She pulled out a second stack of paper, clipped together at the corner. Furthermore, Warren claims my client was heavily medicated on narcotic painkillers during this fictional meeting. These are Cole's complete pharmacy logs from his outpatient rehabilitation, released under his explicit authorization this morning. His prescription for oxycodone was fully discontinued by his orthopedic surgeon on March 12th. By August, his pain management regimen consisted exclusively of over-the-counter ibuprofen and ice packs. Helen placed her hands flat on the desk, leaning in just a fraction of an inch. Warren Hayes didn't just forge a commercial loan document, detective. He just walked into a bank lobby and executed a sworn affidavit containing provable, documented perjury. He claimed to visit an apartment my client hadn't lived in for half a year, to witness a signature from a man who was entirely sober, living 20 miles away in my guest room. The silence in the cramped office was absolute. Durbin looked at the lease termination, then at the pharmacy logs, and finally at the forged loan application. He closed the file folder with a heavy thud. He's still sitting in the lobby at First Northern, Durbin said softly, almost to himself. He told the branch manager he was waiting for me to call him back to confirm I received his statement. I suggest you send a patrol car to confirm receipt, Helen said. Durbin looked up at me. The skeptical, tired cop routine was gone. He just looked at me like I was a guy who had survived a very long, very ugly war. Give me 20 minutes, Mr. Vance. I need to run this lease termination through the county clerk's database to verify the seal. If it clears, I will type your clearance letter myself, and I will have the state's attorney sign it before 10 o'clock. He stood up, grabbed his radio from his belt, and walked out of the office. Raymond let out a long, slow breath, leaning back in his plastic chair. He reached over and clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder, squeezing once. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. I sat there looking at the empty chair where Durbin had been sitting. My chest felt strange. It wasn't tight anymore. The freezing clarity that had gripped me since the launch party was melting, leaving behind a profound, hollow exhaustion, followed immediately by an overwhelming sense of relief. Warren had tried to play his old game. He thought I was still the 25-year-old kid in the hospital bed, isolated, medicated, and easily manipulated. He thought he could lie, and his word would carry the weight of a father over a son. He hadn't realized that when he abandoned me, he left me to be found by people who actually knew how to fight. 22 minutes later, Durbin walked back into the office. He was holding a piece of heavy stock paper with the official seal of the Cook County State's Attorney embossed at the top. He handed it directly to me. It was absolute. The language was sterile and flawless. It explicitly named Cole Vance, formerly Cole Hayes, as the sole victim of a familial identity theft ring. It stated definitively that I was not a target, person of interest, or material witness in the criminal fraud investigation regarding Luminance Beauty and First Northern Bank. I just dispatched 2 officers to the Evanston branch, Durbin said, sitting back down. Warren Hayes is being taken into custody for perjury, filing a false police report, and felony fraud. The warrant for your sister's arrest has been forwarded to the Berwyn police. They'll be waiting for her when she's medically cleared for discharge at McNeil. Thank you, detective, I said. Don't thank me, Durbin said, gesturing toward Helen. Thank your mother. She builds a hell of a paper trail. I took my phone out of my pocket, snapped a high-resolution photo of the clearance letter, and attached it to an email to Conrad Voss. Subject: Clearance Letter Vance Logistics, Series B Body. Attached per our conversation. I expect the wire transfer to resume immediately. Let me know if Boston needs anything else. I hit send. We stood up, shook Durbin's hand, and walked out of the Financial Crimes Division. By the time we reached the ground floor and stepped out onto the courthouse steps, my phone buzzed in my hand. It was an email from Conrad. Received. Compliance has cleared the flag. The $12 million is in transit. See you at the board meeting on the 15th, Cole. Good work. I stopped on the concrete steps. The morning gridlock was still crawling along California Avenue, the air smelling of diesel and damp pavement. The sky was finally starting to break, thin patches of pale blue showing through the overcast gray. Did it go through? Raymond asked, stopping beside me. It went through, I said. I locked my phone and slid it into my pocket. Helen linked her arm through mine. She looked tired, the sharp edge of the trial lawyer fading back into the warm, steady presence of the woman who used to bring me dark roast coffee in the rehab ward. I don't know about you two, Helen said, looking out at the traffic, but I've been awake since 2 in the morning, and I'm starving. There's a diner on Roosevelt that does the best hash browns in the city. I looked at her, and then at Raymond, who was already nodding in agreement, jingling the truck keys in his pocket. I didn't look back at the courthouse. I didn't think about the phone calls Warren would try to make from a holding cell, or the apologies Diane would try to scream through voicemail. They belonged to a life I didn't live anymore. Hash browns sound perfect, I said. We walked down the steps together, leaving the past exactly where it belonged, and went to get breakfast.